Hello and welcome to Microfile, which gives you the chance to see again some of the best items from the Micro Live series. Tonight, a topic that's vital to all of us, how computers are moving into the world of medicine.
We'll be looking at medical imaging, new techniques for examining the body's interior, and we review some healthy home software. But first, computers and the family doctor.
Didsbury near Manchester is one of only a small number of areas in the country where the local general practitioners are using computers to help in the running of their practice.
Yes, can I help you?
Yes, I have an appointment with Dr. Kay.
What name is it, please?
Langdale.
Right, just take a seat in the way.
The receptionist here is using a computerised appointment system to check in the patient, a relatively simple application. But at this practice, the partners have also taken the computers into their consulting rooms, a much bigger challenge.
Mrs. Langdale.
They can call up computerised medical records for all their patients and can update the records during the consultation.
Hello.
Hello, Dr. Kay.
Come and have a seat.
Thank you very much.
How are you, Mrs. Langdale?
I'm fine, thank you, but I just seem to have the rash again on my hand.
So you want some more of that cream that you had
Yes,
before?
please, yes.
This patient's record has details of her recent medical history and treatment. The screen reminds Dr. Kay that Mrs. Langdale is suffering from eczema. In this case, he's decided to continue with the treatment. He calls up details of a last prescription, modifies it as necessary, then prints it out in a standard NHS form. It's much easier to read that way. The system also gives the doctor better control over the drugs he prescribes. For instance, if a drug is suddenly taken off the market, he can print out a list of those using it and substitute an alternative.
Let me have another look at it in a week if it's not improving.
Right.
A busy practice like this has 12,000 patients, and each patient has his own set of records stored on these shelves. It's a massive amount of information, and it's not very easy to get at. But with good access to that information, a GP can take steps to prevent illness.
One of the problems with manual records is that the information is locked away in silly little envelopes that were produced in 1911 by, I think, Lord George. And you cannot get the information out. If you start putting information onto your computer, then it becomes dramatically easier to retrieve that information, to analyse it, to see where you're going. It also allows you to search for patients who have particular needs or particular characteristics so that you can concentrate attention on them.
Some illnesses strike at particular sections of the population, and these high-risk groups need to be checked. For instance, women between the age of 35 and 65 are at high risk from cervical cancer and need to be tested regularly. But these records are filed by name. To find all those women between 35 and 65, I'd have to look at every one of them, and it could take weeks. If they're on a computer, I could extract the list of high-risk women in a matter of minutes. Not only that, by looking at the clinical information on the computer, I could prioritise those women who'd had a suspicious smear previously. To carry out a search, the receptionist looks up the code for a cervical smear and types it into the computer. She then answers a number of questions about the search, like whether age or handicap are significant factors. It takes 2 or 3 minutes to search the 12,000 records and find the names of all the women in the practice who need to be contacted. And you can see it's found 34 of them. But this is just one example. There are many.
We have looked for patients over the age of 65 who have both heart and lung disease, or both, and so that we can identify those patients who need an influenza vaccination in the autumn.
When a search is complete, the list of those at risk is printed out. Well, once he has this list, the doctor can send out requests for the patient to come in and see him, or he can mark their record to remind him that if the patient comes in with a cold, he needs checking. There are over 50 million of these records held nationally. It's a vast amount of information about health. But the problem facing those people looking for causes of illness is how to find patterns hidden within all this data. Looking through manual records is slow and laborious. But if more GPs follow this example and computerise their records, then it may be possible to discover new links between lifestyle and disease.
The computer cannot be of economic benefit for an individual practice, but because the general practitioners are collecting information about illness in the community, which is of enormous value to the health service and to which the health service at the moment has no access. I believe that in national terms, computing in general practice can be economic to the entire health service by making that sort of information available.
In the early 1980s, the Department of Trade and Industry funded a scheme called Micros for GPs to encourage the use of computers by doctors. But although awareness levels were raised, there were many problems with the hardware and software, and there are still very few practices using them.
David Ellis is a young doctor with a computer background, and he persuaded Mac to fill in his computer questionnaire.
Hello, David.
Hello, Mac.
Well, you wrote this software using an expert system shell, and from your knowledge, you've built up a set of rules. Could you give me an example of some of the rules I've been answering questions to?
Yes, certainly. The system was actually developed using an expert system made in this country called Crystal. And what I did is put in lots of rules, which I got from other sources, so in effect I was knowledge engineering. And the rules were typically of the sort of if, then do something else type. So, for instance, one rule was if the patient smokes cigarettes, then give advice on stopping smoking. And also, as a result of that, assign a particular risk factor to the fact that you smoked or you did smoke in the past.
Well, what happens when you run it?
Well, essentially what happens is that the program looks through all the rules. As you see, there's a long, long list of them, around about 180 in all, and draws conclusions from the various evidence that you put in the form of answers to questions. And so, if you like, it's like a tree with lots of evidence at the bottom in the roots of the trees, and then finally you get to the top of the tree where you have a final conclusion, which is that you may have a particular risk of developing cardiovascular disease in the future.
Well, when you've got this conclusion from the computer, can you then ask the computer what rules it's used to arrive at that conclusion?
Yeah, absolutely. That's a very important point in any expert system, especially in the medical field, because the doctor must understand why the computer is drawing a particular conclusion.
Well, what am I doing? What's my situation?
You're doing pretty well, actually, in that. If we look at this is the printout from the program, and it gives us some general information about you, your medical information. And if you look at these stars, it indicates that, in fact, you did smoke cigarettes in the past, which gives you a certain risk, but it's less than if you were smoking at present. Then we come to the psychosocial area, and this identifies that, in fact, you are a fairly competitive personality. That's something, again, to bear in mind. We have your examination, and I put in various things like the fact that your height and weight, and also this thing called the waist-hip index. It's actually the degree of paunch, which is another risk factor, and also your blood pressure. And then we go on through investigations, which I've got from other sources, and an analysis. This takes all the information and works out a mathematical probability of you generating cardiovascular disease. And as you see, it's actually well below average.
Thank you. Well, without a computer system screening like this, and the analysis in this detail might never have happened. Studies have clearly shown the positive benefits of computer technology when applied to screening, and bodies like the World Health Organization are currently trying to encourage this sort of preventative medicine.
Well, the computer here is monitoring my heart rate, and computers are particularly good at this sort of thing, logging and displaying data. And this particular software has been developed mainly as a teaching aid. I'll just call up the graph screen. Now, what you're seeing here is my heart, my pulse, as it's actually happening, and it's picked up through a sensor which is attached to my earlobe. And then the information is translated into a graph showing how my heart rate is responding to exercise. And you can see that before I started exercising, the heart rate was quite slow, and then it picked up like mad when I was cycling, and then it's dropped away again. And the computer analyzes the data, and it takes into account things like the stabilizing time of the heart rate after exercise. Well, the software doesn't draw any conclusions about your fitness. You still need some medical knowledge to interpret the data.
Well, this package called Internist is an example of home diagnosis programs. They're quite popular in the United States, and this is another American one, Apple a Day. Well, if you're not feeling quite well, you type in your symptoms, and in theory, the computer tells you what's wrong. Well, let's see if it works. Well, I've typed in some symptoms here: fatigue, weakness, general pain in the chest, difficulty breathing, rapid respiration, shortage of breath, weakness in the legs, pain leg, cramp like when walking, relieved by rest, and so on. Now, I'm going to ask the computer to run the diagnosis and tell me what's wrong with me. Now, I need a pooled diagnosis there, and now it's running through each one of those symptoms and checking up with every disease in the computer, every illness in the computer, to see which ones I'm most likely to have. And it analyzes it fairly rapidly, and there it comes out. Well, the first thing it says is I've got vitamin B1 deficiency, anemia from iron deficiency, ovarian cancer, small intestine cancer and so on. David, is this any good?
Well, it's certainly true that if you had cancer or if you had anemia, you would actually come to your doctor with some of those symptoms. But the problem is that the software doesn't actually adopt the same decision-making process or diagnostic process of a doctor. What it's actually doing is looking through its database, taking the signs and symptoms you put in it, and then pooling all that information and extracting any illnesses which has got those signs and symptoms. So it's not following what doctors normally do. And I say it's dangerous.
Well, in fact, I cheated a little bit there. The symptoms I put in there is what you feel like near the summit of a Himalayan peak.
Oh dear. Well, if home micro software isn't much good at sorting out your body, perhaps they can do better with your mind. This home psychology programme claims to let you analyse your boss or your potential partner. Now, I've already entered some details about my partner for the day, that is Mac, and the programme is actually called, rather aptly, Mind Prober. Well, the sort of questions it asked me are the sort of things that any woman's magazine would ask you. You know, it's things like, is he aggressive? Is he handsome? Is he opinionated? Is he humorous? I'm not going to tell you what I replied, but I will give you a sample of the sort of conclusions that the software draws. It says here, are you ready for this, Mac? Mr. McD is an exuberant person who likes to do things his own way, and I didn't need a computer to tell me that. David, what do you make of this sort of software?
Well, to be honest, it's really rather superficial. It's a sort of pop psychology on a computer. And even though the conclusion may bear some resemblance with the reality, with that person's personality, I wouldn't really hold much for it. Though, of course, in the States, things like this sort of program, though considerably more sophisticated and might add expensive, are being used by the US Army for assessing their raw recruits, and also by business and commerces for assessing their prospective employees. And that's also true in this country as well. But one area I find quite frightening is a program called Mind Over Minors, which is produced to allow parents in the home to assess the psychological development of their children.
Well, one GP in Hackney is running a health information bulletin board on a Prestel-like system. Well, here's a page from a section on AIDS, and there are many other pages dealing with things like diet and exercise and so on. If you're interested, the telephone number is 01 986 4360. We spoke to Dr. Chris Dobbing, who runs the board. He said its main appeal was being able to access health information privately in your own home.
Well, of course, we can help ourselves by adopting a more healthy lifestyle. Programmes like Your Health for the Spectrum have advice on diet and exercise, and this programme, called Diet Analyzer, lets you work towards a given dietary goal. Now, anyone who's ever tried to go on a diet knows the problem. I mean, just keeping track of the calories is a monumental task, let alone trying to calculate fat, fibre, protein, all the other things that influence your weight and health. Well, Diet Analyzer is a sort of spreadsheet. What you do is you enter all the food that you've eaten or you'd like to eat, and then the software displays the nutritional value of that food, and it keeps a running total of your daily intake. And for instance, I noticed there on cholesterol, the cholesterol contained in just one egg, in fact, takes me well over my daily cholesterol allowance. So there's obviously not going to be any eggs in this particular diet of mine. But I also noticed that so far, I've still got several calories to make up. But of course, the system doesn't yet know about the Big Mac that I consumed earlier on. So maybe I better put that in and see what it does to my total. Oh, it's got confused by Big Mac, so it's offered me the food directory. It's not macaroni, it's not Macedonian nuts, no, it's McDonald's Big Mac. 0. How many Big Macs? Well, it was 2. It's own up time. Oh, no, look at that. And my calorie total, you see, has gone way over the top, so I'm going to start my diet tomorrow. What do you think of this dietary software?
I must admit I'm really impressed by this sort of software because it's doing a job which the average GP would find very difficult, because GPs aren't trained as dietitians. In fact, normally you'd have to go to a trained dietitian to get that sort of information. But this is doing a very good job. And more also to the point, it will help you devise exercise regimes for working off all those excess calories in the Big Mac.
At University College Hospital in London, the new technology is already an everyday part of the working environment. For instance, premature babies like this need constant monitoring for such things as abnormal breathing patterns. And microelectronic devices are good at just that, freeing the staff for other jobs and making more effective use of their time. But the equipment is relatively simple. It hardly uses any computer power, just the odd beeb or apple tucked away for, say, data recording. That information is combined with more traditional examinations. The problem is that the doctors still only have external symptoms to work with, when what they really want to know is what's going on inside the patient. But nowadays, new techniques like ultrasound are available. They use more powerful computers, and they allow the doctor to take a lengthy and safe look at what's going on inside. One of the biggest uses of ultrasound today is for scanning of pregnant women. All the evidence suggests that it's entirely safe, and in experienced hands, ultrasound is relatively easy to use. But the images aren't that easy to interpret for the untrained eye. If you look carefully, you can see the head and the features on the face, and so can the mother.
Right, you see the face. One eye, and the other eye. See that? Oh, yeah. And the chin.
The technique works by sending out beams of high-frequency sound, ultrasound, into the body. The beams are reflected from the structures inside and bounce off in all directions. To get a high-quality image, there are several transmitters and lots of reflected signals. The computer has to analyze all the reflected signals and interpret them as an image on the screen for the doctors. Ultrasound is already an accepted and relatively commonplace technique in most hospitals. But with the cost of machines rising all the time, the medical professionals are having to carry out cold-hearted cost-benefit analysis. Could the money be better spent elsewhere? Is patient care really improved? Those types of questions are even more important in a much newer area of high-tech medicine.
Fine, all we're going to do is take some pictures of your head. The first picture we're going to take, I'm going to move you through the scanner. And the table will just fly.
One step higher up the ladder is computerized tomography, or CT for short, a highly developed form of X-ray imaging. It's not unusual for CT machines to cost £750,000. For a CT scan, the patient is placed in the exact center of the machine. There's an X-ray source on one side and a detector on the other. A very narrow beam of X-rays goes right through the patient. The difference in CT scanning is that this process is repeated many times at different angles. The readings from the different beams are of little practical value until they're interpreted by the online mini-computer. The specially written software combines all the data to make up the final image.
Okay, Linda, we're going to do a scan now.
Remarkably, the image processing takes only a few seconds. The result is an image of a slice through the patient's body. In this case, a slice through the head, through the brain. Such three-dimensional views of soft tissue like the brain could simply not be obtained by conventional X-ray. And the technique is equally good at scanning other parts of the body.
This patient, a young man of 28, came to us complaining of back pain. His conventional X-rays showed a collapse of a vertebral body. This is the CT slice through the abnormal spinal vertebra. There's the heart, the lungs on each side, and there is the back. The detailed view demonstrates the tumor which is destroying the vertebral body, and the spinal cord within the vertebra is compressed and displaced to the left side. We therefore decided to obtain tissue from that area with a needle biopsy, which was guided by the CT scanner. This is my biopsy needle, which has been very accurately placed on the surface of the tumor. Using CT guidance, we were then able to drill through the tumor and obtain tissue for histology, for examination in the laboratory, avoiding damaging the spinal cord. Very fortunately, histological examination of the tumor showed it to be radiosensitive, and hopefully he will get a very good response from irradiation. The CT scanner here has avoided the necessity for an open operation in order to get the tissue for histological examination.
But now there are those who would argue that CT itself may soon be eclipsed by the very latest technology, magnetic resonance imaging, or MRI for short, providing pictures in a completely new way. In general terms, what sort of things is MRI used for?
Well, if I may just take you to task over the term MRI, which means magnetic resonance imaging, which implies that this enormously powerful diagnostic tool is a very expensive camera. That it is not. It's an instrument which can measure almost any physiological processes and abnormalities in the body. It's an instrument which can take pictures, of course, but the pictures are based on living chemistry rather than shadowgrams, which we're used to with X-rays.
MRI is particularly important because it can give information about the body in a non-invasive way. No X-rays, no radioactive drugs, and certainly no exploratory surgery. For an MRI scan, the patient is placed right inside the machine at the center of a very powerful magnetic field. The technique looks at individual hydrogen atom nuclei in the body, each of which acts like a tiny magnet. In the magnetic field generated by the machine, the tiny magnets all line up. Then a second magnetic field is applied at right angles to the first field. The nuclei turn and line up with the second field. If that second magnet is suddenly turned off, the nuclei move back to their previous positions and they give off a radio frequency signal. For a whole body, there are billions of signals from billions of nuclei. The latest generation of 32-bit mini-computers are needed to work out the number and position of the nuclei and display them as an image on the screen, and all in a few seconds. Even though this technique has been available only for a short time, there are already numerous applications, from heads to whole bodies. And not an X-ray anywhere, just a harmless magnetic field. At the Brompton, they have a special use for this new technique.
We're using the machine to study the cardiovascular system. And this is the most important area, really, of contemporary medicine. Half of us are due to die of one disease process, which is blocked arteries to the brain and to the heart, causing coronary and stroke. And a vast amount of diminution of quality of life is caused by arterial disease. Our long-term objective is to use this as a population screening instrument, for which we have a lot more work to do, and to really get at the natural history of this disease which is decimating us, and to monitor the efficacy of treatments.
Well, MRI machines are very expensive. They can cost anything up to £2 million. But new scanners are currently being developed for a tenth of that price, and that could mean that this technology will eventually become widely available in NHS hospitals.
Well, let's hope so. That's it for this week. Next week, I'll look to the future.
Until then, bye-bye.
Goodbye.